The moment I discovered the hotel receipt in my wife's purse for a weekend she supposedly spent at her sister's house was the moment I realized that my entire life for the past 5 years had been a carefully orchestrated lie performed by the two people I trusted most in this world. And what I did next would destroy not just 2 marriages, but an entire social circle that had enabled their betrayal through willful blindness and convenient excuses. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Robert Anderson, but everyone calls me Rob, and I'm 67 years old now, though I was 62, when I discovered that my wife Jennifer and my best friend since college Michael had been having an affair for 5 years right under my nose, while I played the fool hosting dinner parties, where they sat across from each other pretending to barely tolerate one another, when in reality they were meeting every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at the Marriott downtown. Let me paint you a picture of what I thought my life was before that receipt changed everything, because context matters when you're about to hear how I systematically destroyed the lives of 2 people who deserved every ounce of pain I inflicted on them, and then some for what they did to me, and to Michael's wife Susan, who was just as blindsided as I was. Jennifer and I had been married for 35 years, and we had what everyone considered the perfect marriage with 2 successful adult children, David and Sarah, who were both married with kids of their own, and we lived in a beautiful colonial house in Westport, Connecticut, that we had bought 20 years ago when my consulting firm had taken off, and money stopped being a concern. She was 59 when I caught her still beautiful in that way women are when they take care of themselves, with regular tennis lessons and yoga classes and expensive treatments at the spa that I paid for, thinking I was investing in our happiness, when really I was funding her affair preparation, making sure she looked good for my best friend. Michael and Susan lived 3 streets over in an even bigger house, because Michael's hedge fund had made him obscenely wealthy, and our families had been intertwined for decades with vacations together, birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and even a few business ventures that had made us all comfortable enough to retire early, though apparently retirement just gave Jennifer and Michael more time to betray their spouses. We had a friend group of about 12 couples, all successful professionals or business owners in the Westport area, who got together regularly for dinners, golf outings, charity events, and wine tastings. And everyone always commented on how lucky Jennifer and I were to have such a strong marriage after all these years, while Michael and Susan were seen as the power couple with their wealth and social status. The receipt I found was dated 3 months ago for 2 nights at the Marriott in Stamford, and it was in Jennifer's purse, which she had asked me to grab her reading glasses from while she was cooking dinner. And when I saw it, my first thought was confusion, because her sister lived in Boston, not Stamford, and she had supposedly driven there, not stayed in a hotel. I didn't confront her immediately because something in my gut told me to dig deeper first, so I casually asked about her weekend with her sister, and listened as she spun an elaborate tale about shopping and catching up and seeing a show together, all while I held the receipt in my pocket, feeling it burn like a hot coal against my leg. That night I lay awake next to her, listening to her peaceful breathing, and wondering how many times she had lied to me, how many supposed girls' trips or sister visits or book club meetings were actually rendezvous with someone else. And I felt like a detective in my own life about to uncover something that would change everything. The next day, while Jennifer was at her supposed Pilates class, I went through our credit card statements with a fine-tooth comb and found a pattern of charges that didn't make sense. Lunches at restaurants. She claimed to hate purchases from lingerie stores that I never saw the results of, and cash withdrawals that didn't match up with any household expenses we had discussed. I also checked her phone records online, since I paid the bill, and discovered hundreds of texts and calls to a number I didn't recognize at all hours of the day and night, including long conversations when she was supposedly at the gym or running errands or having lunch with friends from her book club. I hired a private investigator named James Morrison, who came highly recommended from a divorce attorney friend who didn't know I was investigating my own wife, and James was worth every penny of his $5,000 retainer, because within 2 weeks he had photographs that shattered my world into a million pieces. The photographs showed Jennifer and Michael entering and leaving the Marriott together, holding hands, kissing in the parking lot, and one particularly damaging shot of them on a balcony in bathrobes toasting with champagne, while I was supposedly at a medical conference in Chicago that Michael knew about because he had helped me prepare my presentation. James had also discovered that they had been using a corporate credit card from one of Michael's shell companies to pay for their encounters, which explained why I hadn't seen more hotel charges on our statements, and that they had a routine of meeting every Tuesday and Thursday, when Michael was supposedly at business meetings and Jennifer was at various appointments or activities. The timeline James constructed went back 5 years to when we had all gone on a cruise together to celebrate Michael's 50th birthday, and apparently something had happened between them on that ship, while Susan and I were enjoying the amenities oblivious to our spouses sneaking around behind our backs like teenagers. What made it worse was that for 5 years they had maintained this charade, attending our dinner parties, acting like casual acquaintances, even staging small disagreements to throw us off the scent, while everyone in our social circle apparently suspected something, but said nothing, because it wasn't their business to get involved in other people's marriages. James also discovered that 3 of our mutual friends definitely knew about the affair, because they had provided alibis for Jennifer and Michael on multiple occasions, covering for them when their stories didn't quite add up, and I made a mental note to deal with those enablers after I handled the main event. I spent the next month gathering more evidence, creating a comprehensive file that included photographs, emails that James had somehow obtained showing them professing their love for each other, and planning their future together, once they figured out how to leave their marriages without losing too much in the divorces they were apparently planning for next year. One email from Jennifer to Michael made me physically sick when she wrote about how boring I had become, and how Michael made her feel alive again like when they were young, and that she couldn't wait until they could stop pretending and be together publicly, without having to hide their love, which was rich considering they had been hiding it for 5 fucking years. Michael's emails were equally nauseating, talking about how Susan was cold and focused only on their social status, while Jennifer understood the real him, and how he counted the days between their meetings and had never felt this way about anyone before, which was particularly insulting considering he had been my best friend since we were 22 years old. They had even discussed what they would do with their money after their divorces, with Michael promising to take care of Jennifer in the style she was accustomed to, and Jennifer saying she didn't care about money as long as they were together, which was laughable considering she had spent our entire marriage accumulating expensive things and social status symbols. The most enraging discovery was that they had been planning to string Susan and me along until Michael's newest fund was fully vested in 18 months and Jennifer could claim maximum alimony based on our current lifestyle, which meant they were not only betraying us, but actively planning to financially destroy us in the process, while maintaining their own comfort. I knew I had to tell Susan, but I wanted to do it in a way that would cause maximum damage to Jennifer and Michael, because simply divorcing them wasn't enough punishment for 5 years of deception, and the callous way they had plotted our financial ruin while smiling to our faces and accepting our hospitality and friendship. I arranged to meet Susan for coffee on a Wednesday morning when I knew Jennifer and Michael wouldn't be together, and I brought the entire file with me, watching her face crumble as she looked through the evidence and realized that her perfect life was built on a foundation of lies just like mine had been. Susan's reaction was interesting because after the initial shock and tears, she became ice cold and calculating, asking me what I planned to do. And when I told her my idea for exposing them at the annual Christmas party we hosted for our friend group, she smiled in a way that reminded me why she had been so successful in corporate law before marrying Michael. We spent the next 3 weeks planning every detail of what would be the most memorable Christmas party in Westport history, though not for the reasons our guests would expect when they arrived in their festive attire, ready for champagne and small talk about vacation plans and stock portfolios. Susan and I met secretly several times to coordinate our plan, making sure we had copies of all the evidence, and that our lawyers were ready to file divorce papers the moment the party was over, because we wanted Jennifer and Michael to be served, while they were still reeling from the public humiliation we were about to inflict on them. We also made sure to invite everyone who had known about the affair and covered for them, because they deserved to witness the destruction they had enabled, and to know that we knew about their complicity in this betrayal, and that there would be consequences for their choosing sides in such a spectacular fashion. The party was scheduled for December 15th, a Saturday night, and Jennifer threw herself into planning it with her usual attention to detail, hiring caterers, decorators, and even a small jazz band, never knowing that she was organizing her own public execution, while I smiled and wrote checks and told her everything looked perfect, which it did for what I had planned for this moment of absolute destruction. Michael and Susan arrived together as always, with Susan playing her part perfectly, greeting Jennifer with air kisses and complimenting her dress, while Michael and I shook hands and talked about the markets like we had done 1,000 times before, except this time we both knew that in exactly 1 hour their entire world would come crashing down. We had 43 guests that night, all dressed in their holiday finest, sipping champagne and nibbling on catered hors d'oeuvres, while Jennifer and Michael carefully avoided being too close to each other, maintaining their practiced distance that they thought was fooling everyone, but was actually just insulting our intelligence. At exactly 8:30, I clinked my glass to get everyone's attention and announced that I had a special presentation to share, something that Jennifer and I had been working on together, which made her look confused, but she smiled and played along, probably thinking I had arranged some sweet surprise for our anniversary, which was coming up in January, not knowing that the surprise would be anything but sweet. I had set up a large screen TV in the living room connected to my laptop, and as everyone gathered around with their drinks, I started the presentation, which began with beautiful photos of our families over the years, vacations, weddings, celebrations, all the moments that had defined our friendships and our marriages, creating a false sense of warmth and nostalgia. Then the tone shifted as I said that sometimes pictures tell a different story than the one we think we're living, and the next slide showed the first photograph of Jennifer and Michael entering the Marriott together, and you could hear the collective gasp from the crowd as people realized what they were seeing wasn't some innocent misunderstanding. Jennifer's face went white as snow, and she started to move toward me saying, "Rob, what is this?" But I held up my hand and continued with the presentation, showing photograph after photograph of their 5-year affair, while providing commentary about the dates and times and how they corresponded with specific lies they had told us. Michael tried to leave, but Susan had positioned herself by the door and said in her courtroom voice that everyone might want to stay for the whole show, because it was about to get really interesting, and the way she said it made him freeze in place, knowing that his wife had known and planned this ambush with me. I showed the emails next, reading selected passages aloud, including the parts where they discussed their plans to divorce us and take as much money as possible, and you could see our friends' faces changing from shock to disgust as they realized the depth of the deception and calculation involved in this betrayal. The coup de grace was a video that James had managed to capture of them in a restaurant having an intimate dinner, toasting to their future together, and discussing how stupid Susan and I were for not figuring it out after all these years, which made several people in the room actually gasp out loud at the cruelty of their words. When the presentation ended, the room was dead silent, except for Jennifer's sobbing and Michael's heavy breathing, and I announced that divorce papers would be served to both of them first thing Monday morning, and that they should enjoy each other's company because they had just lost everything else that mattered in their lives. Susan then took the floor and in her calm, measured, lawyer voice listed out exactly what Michael would be losing in the divorce, including access to several investment accounts that were actually in her family trust and couldn't be touched by him, which he had apparently forgotten about in his arrogance about his wealth. She also announced that she had already informed his business partners about the affair and the potential scandal it could cause for their firm, especially since Michael had been using company resources to fund his extramarital activities, which could be construed as embezzlement and might warrant a criminal investigation. The friends who had covered for them, Barbara Thompson, Rachel Martinez, and Tom Chen, were specifically called out during the presentation, and I watched their faces burn with shame as everyone else turned to look at them, realizing they had been complicit in this betrayal and would face their own social consequences for choosing to enable adultery. Jennifer tried to salvage something from the wreckage, approaching me with tears streaming down her face, saying we could work through this, that it was a mistake, that she loved me. But I just laughed and told her that 5 years of deception wasn't a mistake, it was a choice she made every single day when she looked me in the eye and lied. Michael attempted to speak to Susan, but she cut him off, saying that his belongings would be packed and placed in storage, and that he should find somewhere else to stay immediately, because the locks on their house would be changed by morning, and security would be instructed not to allow him on the property under any circumstances. The party disbanded quickly after that, with people leaving in shocked silence, except for a few who stopped to express their support for Susan and me, and their disgust at what Jennifer and Michael had done. And I noticed that Barbara, Rachel, and Tom left without saying goodbye to anyone, knowing their own reputations were now tainted. Within 24 hours, the news had spread throughout Westport's social circles, and Jennifer and Michael found themselves persona non grata at the country club, the yacht club, and every social gathering that mattered, while Susan and I were surrounded by support and sympathy from people who genuinely cared about us. The divorces were brutal and expensive, but satisfying, with Jennifer getting far less than she had anticipated, because Connecticut's adultery laws still carried some weight, and the evidence of her planning to maximize her take in a future divorce showed bad faith that the judge took into consideration when dividing assets. Michael lost even more because Susan's lawyer was able to prove that he had misused company funds for his affair, which gave her leverage in negotiations, and he ended up having to liquidate several properties and investments to pay her settlement, while also dealing with an investigation from his partners that ultimately forced him out of the fund he had built. Jennifer moved to a small condo in Norwalk, a far cry from our beautiful Colonial, while Michael relocated to New York City, where he could disappear into anonymity and try to rebuild his reputation away from the scene of his disgrace. The word travels in financial circles, and his betrayal followed him like a shadow. The most pathetic part was that their great love affair that was worth destroying 2 marriages and multiple friendships lasted exactly 3 months after everything was exposed before they turned on each other, with Jennifer blaming Michael for not being discreet enough, and Michael resenting Jennifer for the financial losses he had suffered. I heard through the grapevine that they had a spectacular public breakup at a restaurant in Greenwich, where Jennifer threw a glass of wine in Michael's face, and he called her a gold-digging whore loud enough for everyone to hear, which seemed like poetic justice for 2 people who had thought they were so much smarter than everyone else. Susan and I became closer friends through the ordeal, though never romantically, as some people speculated, because we both needed time to heal from the betrayal and figure out who we were as individuals after decades of marriage to people who turned out to be strangers wearing familiar faces. I sold the house in Westport and moved to a smaller place near the water in Madison, where I could start fresh without the memories haunting every room. And I took up sailing, something I had always wanted to do, but Jennifer had thought was too dangerous, which should have been a red flag about how little she actually knew or cared about my dreams. Susan threw herself back into law, taking on cases pro bono for women who had been betrayed by their spouses, and using her experience to help them navigate the legal system and get what they deserved, while also rebuilding her own sense of self-worth that Michael's betrayal had shattered. Our children were devastated by the revelations, with my son, David, cutting Jennifer out of his life completely after learning about her calculated plan to deceive me, while my daughter Sarah maintained limited contact, but made it clear that her mother had lost her respect and would never be trusted again. Michael and Susan's children reacted similarly, with their daughter Rebecca actually testifying on Susan's behalf during the divorce proceedings about times she had seen her father acting suspiciously, and their son James refusing to speak to Michael for over a year before finally agreeing to limited contact with strict boundaries. The social fallout continued for months, with the 3 couples who had enabled the affair finding themselves gradually excluded from gatherings as people realized they couldn't be trusted. And Tom Chen's wife actually divorced him after finding out he had covered for Michael, while she was going through fertility treatments, which added another layer of cruelty to the betrayal. Barbara Thompson tried to apologize to me, sending a long letter explaining that she had been put in an impossible position and didn't know what to do, but I returned it unopened, because there is no impossible position when it comes to telling someone their spouse is betraying them. You either have integrity or you don't, and she had chosen poorly. Rachel Martinez and her husband moved to Florida ostensibly for his job, but really because they couldn't face the social ostracism that came with being known as people who would cover for adultery and lie to their supposed friends' faces for years without any apparent guilt or consideration for the pain they were enabling. The country club actually revoked Jennifer and Michael's memberships, citing a morals clause in the bylaws that everyone had forgotten existed, until someone on the board who was friends with Susan remembered it and pushed for enforcement, which meant they lost not just their social standing, but actual tangible privileges they had paid handsomely for. I learned later that Jennifer had tried to join another club in Greenwich, but was rejected after someone on the membership committee made some calls and found out about the scandal, which followed her like a scarlet letter wherever she tried to re-establish herself in Connecticut society. Michael attempted to start a new fund, but couldn't attract investors because news of his embezzlement of company resources for personal use had made him toxic in financial circles, and he ended up taking a junior position at a small firm in Manhattan, a huge step down from his previous status as a hedge fund king. The house where Jennifer and I had lived sold quickly to a young family who had no idea about the drama that had unfolded there, and I was glad to see children playing in the yard, where so many lies had been told, bringing new life and hopefully better karma to a place that had been poisoned by deception. Susan kept their house, but renovated it, completely erasing every trace of Michael's presence, and turning his home office into an art studio, where she took up painting as a form of therapy, and actually showed real talent, selling several pieces at a local gallery, which gave her a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with her ex-husband. I started dating again about 18 months after the divorce, meeting a wonderful woman named Patricia, who had also been through a difficult divorce, and understood the trust issues that came with being betrayed by someone you had loved for decades, and we took things slowly, building something real and honest. Susan also found love again with a widower named Charles, who treated her with the respect and devotion she deserved, and who had no connection to our previous social circle, which allowed her to start fresh without the baggage of everyone knowing her story and judging her for missing the signs of her husband's infidelity. The last I heard about Jennifer, she was working as a real estate agent, struggling to make ends meet and living alone in her condo, with no prospect of the comfortable retirement she had planned to finance with my money, while maintaining her affair with Michael, which seemed like appropriate karma for someone who had valued money over loyalty. Michael remarried quickly to a younger woman who was obviously after his reduced but still substantial wealth, and I heard from mutual acquaintances that she was already cheating on him with her personal trainer, which was so ironically perfect that I actually laughed out loud when I heard about it, because apparently what goes around really does come around. 3 years have passed since that Christmas party, and I can honestly say that destroying Jennifer and Michael's lives publicly was the best decision I ever made, because it gave me closure and allowed me to move forward without wondering if I should have handled things differently or given them a second chance they didn't deserve. Susan feels the same way, telling me that the public humiliation was necessary not just for revenge, but for healing, because it prevented Jennifer and Michael from controlling the narrative and painting themselves as victims of loveless marriages, when in reality they were calculating predators who had deliberately hurt the people who loved them most. We still get together for dinner occasionally, Susan and Charles and Patricia, and we can laugh about it now, about how blindly trusting we were, and how much better our lives are without the toxic people we had married, though the scars remain and probably always will, because some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. The friend group we were part of dissolved completely after that night, with people choosing sides or simply drifting away, unable to handle the awkwardness of what had been revealed. And honestly, that was a blessing, because it allowed all of us to find new friends who didn't know our history and could see us as individuals rather than characters in a scandal. My relationship with my children has grown stronger through this ordeal, as they've seen me handle the worst betrayal imaginable with dignity and strategic vengeance, rather than falling apart, and they've both told me they're proud of how I stood up for myself and refused to be a victim, even when it would have been easier to quietly divorce and move on. David actually used the experience in a college essay about integrity and consequences that got him into law school, where he's now studying to become a divorce attorney, specializing in helping people who have been betrayed by their spouses get justice, both financial and emotional, which makes me incredibly proud that something good came from this mess. Sarah became more cautious in her own marriage, going to counseling with her husband to make sure they were communicating honestly and building something real rather than just going through the motions. And she credits watching her mother's deception with making her value truth and transparency in all her relationships. The financial impact of the divorce was significant but not devastating thanks to good legal representation and the evidence of Jennifer's adultery and financial planning against me. And I was able to keep enough to maintain a comfortable lifestyle, though certainly not the lavish one Jennifer had grown accustomed to during our marriage. I donated a significant sum to a charity that helps men who have been financially destroyed by divorce rebuild their lives, because I realized how lucky I was to have resources and evidence that many betrayed spouses don't have when facing the end of their marriages and the loss of everything they've worked for. The Christmas party expose has become something of a legend in Westport social circles, with people still talking about it years later as either the most savage revenge story they've ever witnessed or a cautionary tale about the dangers of infidelity, depending on their perspective and personal experiences with betrayal. Some people have criticized me for being too harsh, saying I should have handled it privately. But those people have never been betrayed by their spouse and best friend simultaneously, and don't understand that some wounds require public acknowledgement to begin healing, and some crimes deserve public punishment. I've had other men reach out to me for advice after discovering their own wives' affairs, and I always tell them the same thing, that revenge is a dish best served cold with documentation and witnesses, because private confrontations allow cheaters to control the narrative and minimize their actions, while public exposure forces them to face the full consequences of their choices. The truth is that Jennifer and Michael thought they were entitled to have their cake and eat it too, maintaining their comfortable lives and social status, while conducting their affair in secret and planning to discard Susan and me when it was financially convenient for them, which is a level of narcissism and cruelty that deserved no mercy. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I would have been happier never finding that receipt, living in ignorant bliss, while Jennifer continued her affair. But then I remember the emails about how stupid and boring I was, and I'm grateful for the chance to show her and everyone else that I was neither stupid enough to let it continue nor boring enough to handle it quietly. The best revenge truly is living well, and I'm living very well indeed with Patricia, who appreciates me for who I am rather than what I can provide, and with friends who value honesty over appearances, and with children who respect me more for standing up for myself than they ever would have if I had been a doormat. Jennifer and Michael destroyed 2 marriages, 3 friendships, and an entire social circle with their selfishness. But in doing so, they freed Susan and me to build better lives with people who actually deserve our love and trust, which is an outcome they certainly never anticipated when they started their affair on that cruise 5 years ago. If there's a lesson in this story, it's that secrets have a way of coming out, and when they do, the collateral damage can be far greater than anyone imagined. So, if you're thinking about betraying someone you claim to love, remember that the person you're betraying might be smarter than you think, and might have the patience to wait for the perfect moment to return the favor with interest. The security footage from the party that I had secretly arranged to have recorded still exists on a hard drive in my safe, not because I ever watch it, but because it serves as a reminder that I'm capable of standing up for myself, and that anyone who thinks they can betray me without consequences is gravely mistaken about the kind of man I am when pushed too far. I've learned that forgiveness is overrated when it comes to deliberate betrayal, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for your own mental health is to burn everything down and start fresh, rather than trying to rebuild on a foundation of lies that will never be stable no matter how much therapy or counseling you throw at it. Susan agrees with this philosophy, and has become something of an advocate for betrayed spouses, encouraging them to be strategic rather than emotional in their responses, and to remember that the best revenge against someone who thought you were too stupid to catch them is to prove exactly how wrong they were in the most public and devastating way possible. In the end, Jennifer and Michael got exactly what they deserved, which was each other for a brief, miserable moment, before realizing that people who will cheat with you will cheat on you, and that building a relationship on the destruction of others' trust is like building a house on sand. It might look good for a while, but it will inevitably collapse. Their story serves as a cautionary tale in our new social circles about the importance of loyalty and the consequences of betrayal. And I take a certain satisfaction in knowing that somewhere out there Jennifer and Michael are living with the consequences of their choices, while Susan and I are thriving despite what they tried to do to us. The universe has a funny way of balancing the scales, and in our case, it balanced them at a Christmas party in front of 43 witnesses who will never forget the night that Rob Anderson and Susan Mitchell got their revenge on the people who thought they were too smart to get caught and too important to face consequences for their actions. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.